The sixth week of Sefirah, Midas HaYesod, the Midah of Yosef HaTzadik, who was the sixth of the Zayin Royim. Yosef HaTzadik, who at a young age of 17 years old was all alone in Eretz Mitzrayim, in Ervas HaOretz, and he withstood an awesome test of spiritual strength, retaining his holiness and sanctity in the face of a relentless Yetzirah that wanted to bring him down and to destroy him. The struggle of Yosef HaTzadik has stood with Klal Yisrael, and this is the source for our ability to keep ourselves as a nation above the depravity that defines society as we know it today. A society that's been driven to madness by immorality and permissiveness, a society that has succeeded in blurring the demarcation line between man and beast. Chazal tell us, Heichon kfurosoi shel Moshe. Where is the burial place of Moshe Rabbeinu? We know that Moshe Rabbeinu was buried on a mountain, but we don't know the exact place. Yesh oimrim lamato, some said on the bottom. V'yesh oimrim lamalo. V'hatoira omer, but the Torah says, V'lo yoda ish es kfurosoi. Heard a word b'shem Maizede, Zeichet Tzadik Levroche. He said, the Goyim asked, Heichon kfurosoi shel Moshe. How can we destroy Klal Yisrael, the nation who keeps Das Moshe? Yesh oimrim lamata, some said by driving them down, by persecuting them, by tormenting them, by lowering them. That's how we'll destroy Moshe, the nation of Moshe. Yesh oimrim lamala, some said let's lift them up, let's become close with them, let's mix with them, let's give them the chance to join us and become together with us. That's the way to destroy Klal Yisrael. Where the Torah said, nobody knows how, nobody knows the way to bring down and to destroy this eternal nation of Klal Yisrael. However, there was one time in history where we find a great Rasha who knew what it would take to bring terrible catastrophe upon Klal Yisrael, the type of tragedy that still affects us until today. We know in Parshas Balak, it says, Vayar Balak ben Tzipor es kol asher osa Yisrael ha'emoiri, and he saw Klal Yisrael was passing through his land. Vayogor Moav mipnei ha'om ma'oid, and Moav was very frightened, kiravu, vayokotz Moav mipnei bnei Yisrael. And Balak went and he contacted Bilam and he said, Bilam, give me an eitzah. How do I destroy this nation? And the Svarim HaKadoshim tell us, is based on Zohar HaKadosh and other Svarim, that this was not a simple time in history. This was a moment that there was already the stirrings of Geula, of the footsteps of Mashiach. As we know, the nitzuz, the spark of Melech HaMashiach is in Moav. That's we'll learn more about it in Rus. That was the Shoirish, yet from the Maisa with Lloyd. And as Klal Yisrael was passing through the land of Moav, Balak ben Tzipor is called the Heichel of Mashiach, was frightened that they were going to take the nitzitz of Mashiach and bring about the Geula. Vayogor Moav mipnei ha'om ma'oid ki ravhu. Rav, the Chassam Sofer says, is the Rosh Hashanah Rus and Boyoz, which this is the continuation of the line of Mashiach. Vayokotz Moav, Vayokotz is Miloshen Kates. He was frightened they're going to bring Mashiach. What did he do? He called Bilam. And what did Bilam say? Bilam also knew. Yesh oimrim lamala, yesh oimrim lamata. How do you destroy Klal Yisrael? But he said, I know an eitzah. If they're close to Mashiach, they're close to redemption. I know what can destroy this nation. Eloikeim shel eile soine zimehu. Soine zimehu. The God of this nation hates Gilui Arayis. He hates immorality. He hates Nus. And if you will be Machshel Klal Yisrael in Yonim that are the opposite of Kedushas Yisrael, by being Mafkid the Benois Moav and tempting and causing Klal Yisrael to sin, that will bring such destruction upon Klal Yisrael, and that is the way to destroy them and to bring them down. And we know from Atzas Bilam, which the Navi tells us to remember, Ami Zechorna Mayad's Balak and Bilam, what their eitzah was to destroy Klal Yisrael, resulted in the death of 24,000 people. And these 24,000, the Sefer HaGilgulim tell us, were later came back Begilgul Neshama as the 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva who died in the days of Sefirah. How much Torah was lost? 24,000 Tanoim. Imagine a Torah, imagine the Kedusha that would have been in the world had we had these 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. And all this was brought about, the destruction was brought about by the understanding that the weakness that can destroy an eternal nation, a nation that's not afraid of persecution, a nation that's not afraid of death, a nation that's not afraid of being lifted up. There's one thing that can destroy them. There's one thing that can bring such damage that the Medrash tells us that we still have to deal with this damage until Mashiach comes, and the Nakama that we have to take against Moav will only be finished, the final tikkun, in the times of Mashiach. That when we will finally have the proper and final vengeance against the Bnei Moav for what they brought into Klal Yisrael is Elokeim shel Eile Soine Zimo. We know the Kedusha of Yosef HaTzadik, Kedushas HaYesod, is the special treasure of Klal Yisrael, of Atem Tiyuli Mamleches Koyanim V'Goy Kodesh. We're a holy nation. We're a nation that is above the immorality of the Ummah Ha'olam. And this was always the difference. We were always able to tell the Havdalah Bein Yisrael Lo Amim with this Kedusha. I heard once a magnificent pshat from the Lakewood Mashgiach Ramatasiel Salomon Zazayin Gesund und Stark. He said pshat in Rashi in the beginning of Parshas Kedoshim, where it says Kedoshim Tiyu, and Rashi tells us the mitzvah of being Perushim. We should separate ourselves from Arayas, Umin Haveira, Shekol Mokoim She'ata Moitze Geder, Erva Ata Moitze Kedusha. And simply understood, that means wherever we have a Geder, whenever we put a gate in Inyonim of Arayas, that brings Kedusha. But he said the Pshat should be a different pshat. And if you look in Rashi, it seems mamish emes la'amitoy. The Rashi brings misholim. A kohen is not allowed to marry a zoyne v'chalolo, ani Hashem mekaddishchem, v'lo yechal el zari, ani Hashem mekaddisho, yikedoshim yu, each zoyne v'chalolo. And he explained like this. We find there are different demands the Torah places upon us as far as Kedusha. And it goes according to the level. A goy can marry whoever he wants. A yid is mugbal, who he can marry. Can't marry psulei kol. He can only marry he can only marry Yisraelis. He can't marry a goy. A higher Kedusha. A kohen is already more mugbal. He's more mugder. He can't marry a gerusha. A kohen gadol can't even marry an almana. Wherever we find a geder of Kedusha, wherever we find the Torah demands of us higher, a geder of Erva, wherever we find the Torah demands of us a geder and Erva, Atomoitze Kedusha, that's a raya that there is a Kedusha there already. The fact that the Torah demands of us have a Perusha Me'arayas that shows that we are intrinsically a nation of Kedoshim, a Mamleches Koyanim V'Goy Kodosh. And this has been always central to the existence of Klal Yisrael. I once had a guest for Shabbos, a Russian Yid, his name was Reb Lezer, who was a shoemaker, he lived in Lakewood, and he was telling us some of his history that in Russia he was the manager or the foreman of an entire shoe factory. And I asked him, how did you get such a position of responsibility, such a high position? He said any position that demanded achrayas, they always looked for a Jew. The only ones you could depend on was a Jew. So I asked him, how did they know you were Jewish? It wasn't something that you spoke about. You know, in Russia it was always safer to keep your religion quiet. He said in Russia, everybody knew who was a Jew. There was two signs. If somebody didn't get shikah, and he didn't speak nivel peh, didn't speak profanity, you knew he was a Jew. And this is speaking about a Jew who didn't know what Shabbos was, didn't know what mitzvahs was, didn't know what Torah was. But it was nikan, everybody understood there was that havdalah ben Yisrael lo amim. There was that difference, that hechekai, that edelkai, that kedusha. I heard from a businessman, told me that years ago he had to have a business meeting with some bankers, and the meeting was scheduled to take place on a fishing boat. And they all went out together. And he was a Yiddishayim Torah mitzvahs, and after about a half hour of sailing, they take out the whiskey, they start to drink, and they take off their shirts, and they start speaking the most disgusting nivel peh. And he didn't know where to put himself. As a Yid, he was embarrassed. There was one fellow, vice president of the bank, was sitting there with a very serious look on his face, and suddenly he turns to him and he says to him in Yiddish, Ich bin auch a Yid. Isn't it disgusting? The Havdalah bein Yisrael lo Amim, the Mamleches Koyanim v'Goy Kodesh, that sensitivity to Kedusha, to sanctity, this was given to us. This is part of our Yerusha, part of our Yerusha's Avos. We have a natural predisposition to being Kedoshim. And the way, and the Umas Olam and the Satan always understood, the way to bring about tragedy to Klal Yisrael is Elekeyem Shel Eila Soine Zimo, and to bring in hashpois of tumah, of gilui arayos. And this is especially noigeya in the days of Ikvus the Mashiach. As we spoke in the weeks before, B'cho Choisman, we spoke about the midah of chesed, and that there's a special hashpah in midah of chesed, of loving kindness, as we approach the giluyim of Mashiach. And we explained that there's a tzad in tumah, keneged, the wonderful goodness of chesed. On the other side is also the hispashtus of Gilui Arayos, and the Parasha of Arayos says chesed hu. And in a time when b'chol choismen, when there's an extra hashpah of chesed, and even in the Umas Ha'olam, the more they become mischazdim, the more they become kind-hearted, the more they become liberal-minded and more accepting, you see a weakening in the borders, in the gedorim of Gidrei Arayos, because on the opposite end of chesed, of a hispashtus of chesed, is a strengthening of the koiches hatumah. And listen to what Rab Tzadok writes in the Sefer Tzidkes HaTzadik. Bimei Neurim, when a person is young, resiches hatava misgaberes, the powerful taivas, desire is misgaber, becomes strengthened in a person. V'oz marbe chatoem mitzada yetzahara, and this is called chatas neurim, the sins of a person's youth, and the root of this is from the neshamas of the Dor HaMabul. We also find that when the Yemei HaNeurim, when a person is young, he has a tremendous cheshik and a drive and a she'ifa for divrei Torah, for ruchnius, to be nis'ala. And these were the very same nefashos as Mavur and Zohar HaKadosh and Parshas Pinchas, and we find that they were in the Dor HaMidbar. The Dor HaMidbar was the generation that wanted Torah, that wanted to absorb, that wanted to be nis'ala. And in the Dor HaMabul we find Ki Yetze Leiv Ha'adam Rami Ne'urav, and in the Dor HaMidbar we find Zocharti Lo Chesed Ne'urayich. Two koiches of Neurim, of youth. One is in the Resiches HaTaiva Mizgaberes, and one is in the great She'ifa for accomplishment in Torah. Says Rab Tzadok, in the Dor of before Mashiach will come, this will repeat itself for the third time, but as a mixture. They'll be both together. We'll find be'irvuvye chatas neurim v'chesed neurayach. There will be a constant battle in the neshamas. There will be a battle for taiva and for ilam hazef and tanugim, for ra, the koyach and the power of the Dor HaMabul. And on the other side, there will be a raging battle for toiv, for his gabris of zacharti lo chesed neurayach. V'hatoiv yizgaber al hara. The chelik hatoiv will overpower the chelik of ra, the chelik of evil. V'yahabchul the toiv, it will overturn it and turn it into goodness. And this is the generation that we're living in now. And this is where the battle is pitched. And here's where the Melchemes HaYetzer is so strong. Yesod, the midah of Yosef HaTzadik, the sixth midah, Chazal tell us, Misha Torach be'erev Shabbos yoichel b'Shabbos, one who's matriach, one who is omol on the sixth day, especially in the Elef Hashishi, we're in the sixth millennium of existence, which just corresponds to this midah. One who's matriach, one who's omol, one who tries and strives for kedusha, to hire himself, to elevate himself, will be zoichet to Shabbos, will be zoichet to the reward of Olam Haba. Rabbi Yelapian brings a Ramban. And the Ramban writes, when one lives in a tkufa where you see there's a particular hefkeris in a specific inyan, and you see that in the streets and in the chutzos, there is a yerida, there is a deterioration in certain nisyonis, that is a sign that is where a person's ikir mishpat is going to be. Not like those who think and say, oh, the world is so bad, so I'm a tzaddik compared to the world. No. Dafke, there will be the mishpat. And we know we live in a time where the street, where the world has descended into such a low level of pretzes of znus, What was considered preachers 50 years ago by the Goyim is today considered conservative, is considered modest, is considered reactionary. The world just goes lower and lower and lower, and if this is the Nisayan of the Dor, we find right after the story of the Benois Midyan, the Maisa of Bilam, the Torah gives us the Parsha of Nedorim. In Parshas Matos, what is Nedorim? The Sfasemis is Mas, but we have a Torah. Torah has mitzvahs saseh and mitzvahs loy saseh. We don't add to the Torah. Whatever the Torah is, that's what is there. However, there's a chelik in Torah that allows us to add. We can create our own isurim and our own mitzvahs. That's the Parsha of Nedorim. A person makes a neder. Now he has a mitzvah. He has a lav lo yachal devoroi. We are able to create new restrictions on ourselves, new mitzvahs, haisafas in the Torah. What's the inyan of making a haisafa on the Torah? We know in the world there's kedusha and there's tumah. And zelu ma'asam aleikim. For every tumah that is in the world, there's a kedusha that equals and that weighs it and that corresponds to that and overpowers it. And there's a certain amount of evil, a certain amount of ra, and keneged that ra we have the Torah. What happens when Umay Sa'olam break their own Gedorim? They are moisiv, they add on Raz. It says by the Maisa Benois Midyan, until then Umay Sa'olam hayu Gedurim me'aroyas. They themselves had their Gedorim, they themselves had their level of self-respect, they never would stoop so low. What happens when they are moisiv Ram, ichutz legeder, out of the boundaries of what was even acceptable by their own Gedorim? So now we need to add Kedusha. We need to be moisif nidorim and gidorim and siyagim and fences to counteract the extra tumah that's been brought into the world. What kind of world are we living in today? Is there any gidorim that still haven't been broken? Chazal writes that the Umasaylim are given credit. The Gemara said they're giving credit because with all the rishus and aveir that they did, they never stooped so low as to be kaisiv ksuba l'zochar. And yet in today's age we see Rachmana Litzlan, a world where actually Kaisvin Ksuba L'Zocher, the Chafla Bafela. What are we supposed to think? And if somebody doesn't understand it, he's considered a superficial fool. How can you be so narrow-minded? Don't you understand that this is right and this is correct? So if there's such a haisafa of Ra in the world, how much is demanded of us? To be mekadosh ourselves, metar ourselves in the kedusha of Yosef HaTzadik with siyagim and gedorim to bring kedusha into the world to counteract this tumah. The purpose of all this tumah, the Maisa Satan, is to be mahares, is to destroy the Yesod. What is Yesod? What's the definition of Yesod? Imagine you look at a huge, tall building, 100 stories high, and you see people coming and going, and elevators, and businesses, and restaurants. It's tutzach welt. There's a whole part of that building you can't see. That's the foundation, the Yesod. It's buried deep in the ground, yet the whole building is standing on that foundation. You cannot see it. Yesod Tzadik B'Shiva Nelam. Shiva, 7 is the Zayin Yemei Habinyan. Nelam is what's hidden. What's holding up the world? Tzadik Yesod Oilam. Oilam, the word Oilam is Miloshen Helam, hidden. There are hidden koiches that we don't see. The hidden part of a person's avodah, the hidden part of the avodah of the tzaddik. Yosef HaTzadik was in Mitzrayim. He was deep in the ground in a dungeon, in a bar. V'heim lo yikiru, he was hidden, he was a tzaddik nista, nobody knew who he was, yet chimoishelu b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, v'yosef hu ha-mashbir, hidden, unknown who he was the source of all the sustenance, of all the parnasa, as it says in the Sefirah Shiurim Mapi Chazal, that the tzinor of parnasa, the conduit for a person to be zoichet his parnasa, is very much dependent on his shmira in the kedusha of Yosef HaTzadik, which is why the 6th hakofa on hakofas Simchas Torah, which corresponds to Yosef HaTzadik, is the hakofa of Oizer Dalam. And many times we see over this inyan of Yosef hu ha-mashbir. And Chazal tell us if one is not nizah harayosi es maaseh v'kipachti es parnasosi. But at the center, holding up the world, underneath everything is the foundation, is the Yesod, the Chelek Hanelam, the Chelek that we cannot see. What does it mean, the Chelek Hanelam? In everything in the world, there's a Chitzonius and there's a Pnimius. There's a superficial outside and there's a depth, there's a meaningful inside. And usually the meaningful inside corresponds to Olam Haba, and the superficial outside is our perception in Olam Hazeh terms. For example, What is a Talmud Chacham? In Olam Hazeh terms, a Talmud Chacham is somebody who knows how to learn. However, in Olam Haba, it could be that this person knows how to learn, has a very brilliant head, and he may be lazy, doesn't use all his koiches, but compared to people who don't have his brains and don't have his intellect, so he knows much more than others. Comes to Shamayim, he's not a Talmud Chacham, he's an Amoritz. But the person who maybe doesn't have such intellect and doesn't have such background and doesn't have it easy to understand the Blat Gemara, and he struggles and he harbors and he's miyageya and he works hours, he spends every moment that he has with Hasmada Gedoyla, and he accomplishes according to his level of understanding. In Shamayim, he's a Goyin Olam, he's a Gadol Ador, he's a Talmud Chacham. Because in Shamayim we look at Pnimius, we look at Omol. Olam is the same letters as Omol. Where do you create an Olam? We create an Olam with our Omol. And the main mishpat, La'asid Lavoi, how we determine who we are, is Al Kol Nelom, the Pasuk says. Olam Haba is on the Chelik, Be'ikir on the Chelik HaPnimius. That is the Yesod of the whole Shuma, the whole upshatzing von a Mensch. How we determine the value of a person's avodah is according to the chelik hahelam, to the chelik hapnimi. One of the most important yesodas, the yesod of being a yid, is the first halach in Shulchan Aruch, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid. That a person has to live with the awareness, Kuklal Godel Batoyer the Ramah says, Umalas hat Tzadikim Mesha'ochen Lufnei Elokim, that we understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees everything we do. As it says in the past, and a Yid believes and knows there's no difference in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ayin roya, whether he's outside in public or whether he's b'chadrei chadorim. In this world, there is a concept of public and private, how a person acts when people see him and how he acts when he closes the door, when he's b'chadrei chadorim. And then he could be peirik oil. In the world of Ruch, there's no such thing as a closed door. You're always outside. You're always b'farhesia. We're always HaKadosh Baruch Hu is watching us. Yesod, the root of the word Yesod is Sod, is secret, is hidden, what we cannot see. In Midas Lamashal, a person could speak very nicely and be a very presentable person, and yet he could be a mushchas b'midas. Inside, he may be a selfish person, doesn't care about anybody else. He just knows how to talk nicely. You see, some people could talk very nicely when they're outside, but in their homes, they have a completely different language, the way they talk to their spouses, the way they talk to their parents, the way they talk to their families. Then they get in cast, then they act in a completely different way. Who's the real person? That's the chelik hanelam, that's his yesod, that's the part of him that you cannot see. And to state the Sefirah Makdoshim, the ikir mishpat of a person is going to be on his emes, on his yesod, who he is be'emes. And how often are we tested with this? The difference in how a person learns in a bes medrash, how he learns at home. Sometimes it happens a person has to daven at home. He has to daven b'yechidus. He's not well, he stays home. How does he daven then? There are moments when a person is alone with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Those are his moments of Yesod. Those are his moments of Helam, of Tzadik Yesod Olam, of Yesod Tzadik B'Shiva Nelam. The reason that we act differently when we're begoli is because we have the faculty of busha, as the Chovos Levavos expounds in Shar HaBechina, where he explains that it's a special matana from the Rebbeinu Shalom that he gave us the ability to feel busha. And he says, if not for this sensitivity to shame, he says, we wouldn't keep most of the mitzvahs in the Torah. He says, most of what we do is because of that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us this sensation of busha. But he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't give us that we naturally feel busha from the Rebbeinu Shalom, because if we did, then we would never do an Aveir. It's like a person normally will not do an Aveir in public when people can see him. If you would have that sense of shame when facing the Rebbeinu Shalom, you would never sin. Our avodah is M'chuyavim anu lahagia lemidas habusha. I'm reading the lashon of Chovos Levavos. Lahagia lemidas habusha mehaboira al yedei hisboinenis b'roi memusoi. If we contemplate His greatness, and then we can bring ourselves to be ashamed of the Rebbeinu Shalom, even when we're b'chadrei chadorim, and no one can see us what we're doing. Only Hashem, we can have that same sensitivity, and we will know HaKadosh Baruch Hu mistakel al ma'aseinu hagiluyim v'anistorim, as it says in the pasuk, Boishu v'hikol. The This is our avodah. To bring into ourselves, into the chelik ha-yesod, and the chelik of helam, the chelik that's hidden within us, that same realization that Kadosh Baruch Hu is mashgiach and sees us, and He's roya, there's an ayin roya at all times. But there's another inyan that's an extension of this inyan of chitzonius and pnimius. When one connects himself to the world of pnimius, he's mekasher himself to the ultimate bracha. This past Shabbos we learned the toichecha, right? The klolos in Parshas Bechukoisai. We know we learn it very quietly because it's an inyan of klola. In the Svarim HaKadoshim bring the Zohar HaKadosh, Narizal, that actually the toichecha is all brachas. In pnimius it's all brachas. They say one of the reasons why you say it quietly because al pisoid, it's brachas, and a secret you say quietly. In Yonim, that the Torah expresses as klala, but in pnimius, inside, they're bracha. They tell a Maisa, I think it was the Balatani used to learn the Torah every year. One year he wasn't well, and a different Balkaira learned it, and the Tzemach Tzedek fainted. He said the first time he ever heard such klalas. He said every year when the Balatani learned it, all he heard was brachas. Now suddenly he heard the klalas. And interesting, a Rebbe Shemaisa, I heard this from a Yid who was a friend with the Hoizbacher, the attendant of the Minchas Aloza. It was a bacher who was a gabba in the house, and the Minchas Aloza was known to be very sharp, and sometimes he could utter klolos, he was able to say things. And this bacher accidentally was giving the Rebbe some coffee, and he spilled out on him, and the Rebbe began to curse him in grammon, in rhyme. He was singing klolos, and the bacher didn't know what to do with himself. He was so terrified. He was trembling, and he was walking around, he was crying. And the Rebbe saw him. She says, "What's going on?" He said, "You know what happened? I spilled some coffee on the Rebbe, and he gave me klolos and gram, and I don't know what to do." She went to the Rebbe. Says, "Is it true? You told this bacher and you gave me?" Says, "What? Me? Chas v'sholom. Sahadi b'mirayim. Heaven is my witness. Never in my life did I ever give a klola to a yid." But all the klolos were hidden brachas. He was malabish them. He wanted to be mamtik the dinim on this brachas. So he gave it appeared to be klolos, but it was brachas. And the Shemishmul brings a lashon from Zohar HaKadosh that the hidden brachas in the Toichecha are even greater than the open brachas that are written in the Torah. And he says, what's the idea? Why is it that way? Why are the hidden brachas in the Toichecha even greater than the open brachas? And he's masber. As we were saying, every Indian has a chitzonius and a pnimius. And the real chashivas of any Indian is the chelik hahelam, ikid shchines betachtoinim, in the part where you can't see. And a bracha that's behelam, a bracha that's hidden, that bracha is pure, and that bracha is the greatest madrei, greater than any bracha that says openly in the Torah. And we have to understand this, we have to tap into this and connect to this. How do we look at life? How do we look? Are we chitzonim? Are we superficial? We look at things with depth. Person looks at himself, right? A person has an outside, even physically, has an outside and an inside. So on his outside, he's very concerned with how he looks, and what clothing he has, and his grooming, all that. He's concerned with his chitzonim. But if he's ignored his pnimius, he's got inside a heart and lungs and internal organs, which are much, much more important. And he knows that if a scratch on a finger is nothing, but a scratch chalila on a lung could be a very dangerous thing. We understand that what's pnimius, and that too has a pnimius, there's deeper than that, there's nefesh and there's neshama. The deeper something goes, the more important it is that it be kept in tikkun. How do we look at every single thing that happens to us? We can connect to it either ba'ofen chitzayni or ba'ofen pnimi. Someone has akmas nefesh. He has a machloikis with somebody did him an avla, somebody heard him, somebody said something, and he's busy, he said this, and I said that, and I'm going to get him back, and he hasn't, he's so worried, and for 3 days he can't think straight. He's busy with what happened. That's if he's looking at it ba'ofen chitzayni. What about if he looks at it ba'ofen pnimi? What really happened is, the Chabad Salabavas tells us, no one in the world can hurt me, and no one in the world can hurt you. There's no such a thing. No one has the power to ever hurt me, berochnius over gashmis. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted me to have certain agmas nefesh today, and he found the shliach, this and this person. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants something from me, and he wants me to respond in a certain way, to work on my midas. Everything is, there's an toichen pnimi. That's the yesod, that's the foundation of what's happened over here. Person has rachmana l'tzon, we should never know from it, a busha. Person goes through, sometimes he gets, something happened to him, and he was embarrassed, he was humiliated. It's a terrible, terrible pain. It's such a deep pain that there are some people who actually would rather not live than have to go through a humiliation. Yet what is a busha? If a person has a busha, doesn't know where to put himself. He's mamish so tzibrochen, he's so broken, he's so lost. If you look in the Svarim, the Reishis Chacham, when he describes Gehenna, the torments and the tortures of Gehenna, you read the Prokim and Reishis Chacham can always gain from Pachad. And then he describes how Yisurim take away from Gehenna. Yisurei Haguf. And greater than Yisurei Haguf are Yisurei HaNefesh. A person has Agmas Nefesh. And the greatest form of Yisurei HaNefesh is Bushas Ubizyonis. And if a person has Bushas Ubizyonis, he erases so many mountains of Gehenna that he can become so mezuchich, he can release himself from Einshim for so many Averis. So a person could look at the chitzonius of a busha, or he could look at the pneumius of a busha, say, look what just happened to me. We don't want such yisurim, but once it happened, we just say, oh, so I had bizyonis. And in the pneumius, and when I connect myself to the yesod of any Inyan, the yesod, the pnimi is all bracha. The pnimius of the teichach is bracha. In the world of teich, in the world of in the inner sanctum of truth, of pnimius, where tzaddikim live, where tzaddik yesod olam resides, there's only bracha. There's only happiness. There's only simcha. And that's why the Shem Hashem, Zeh Shmi La'olam, and Chazal say Zeh Shmi La'elem. The way Hashem's name is written in the Torah is not the way it's pronounced. It's pronounced Aleph Daled Nun Yud, which has the oisius of din. But the way it's written, the way it's hidden, the Helam, the Shmi La'olam, that's Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is only Chesed V'Rachm and Shefa and Hashpo. We live, though, in a very chitzoniistic world. And we're so used to it, we lose our bearings. And we think in superficial terms. And we forget that things have a teichen, things have a yesod. I remember years ago when I lived in Lakewood, I once was looking to buy a used car. I came to a used car salesman, and there was a few different cars. I was looking to spend. A beautiful car. It was shiny, clean. It had leather seats. It was like a rolling living room. You sat in there, and the buttons and the lights was magnificent, and it was low mileage and $1,800, like cheaper than anything else. And I couldn't believe I found like the best deal. I was so excited to get this car. Then there was an Israeli worker who worked in this place, a fellow with a ponytail. And he calls me, Boina. He was a worker there. He says, what's with you? He says, where's your sense? Don't you see if we're selling this car, this is not for you. He says, I'm Yehudi Vata Yehudi. If you're selling this car for $1,800, don't you understand this car was in an accident and it's finished inside, it's going to fall apart within 3 weeks, this is not for you. We have a factory here, we take these cars after the accident and we polish it up, and we take out all the dents and we spray a delicious new car smell and we turn back the, we do all sorts of things to make you like it, but don't touch it, this is not for you, we weren't planning on selling this to you. I reluctantly listened to what he had to say. I tell you, for a week after, I was still thinking, maybe I should have bought that car. Because we're naturally drawn. We live in a world of chitzonius. And we don't want to think about the pnimis. We want to think about the yesod. Nowhere is this avodah of attaching ourselves to pnimius more profound than in the Milchama of Gili Arayas, in the Milchama of the Kedusha of Yosef HaTzadik. Because this is a very sensitive and private realm where a person is alone with the Rebbeinu Shalom. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows where a person is holding. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows a person's nisyonis, his shmiras ha'einayim, how he goes on the street, how he drives down the highway, when he passes a billboard, whether he's shomer es einav, whether he fights the Yetzer Hara, or whether he gives in to the pituyim of the Yetzer. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what's in his mind, what's in his machshava, what's in his deepest thoughts. And sometimes a person could be davening, a Milah Shemona Esrei, could be learning, and the Rebbeinu Shalom knows that he has different nisyonis in his mind. And avada, all of these nisyonis, a machshava, the derech pekudecha is mazbeis. Avada, it's not an aveira if somebody gets a machshava, a hirhura. What the Aveira is to keep on thinking. That comes from the Yetzer Hara sent. Then there's a mitzvah. Nishmati be called over. A person has an avodah to be megarish, to banish thoughts of tumah from his mind. That's his avodah, and that's his vinishmarto. That's his avodas hayesod. What's doing in the chelik of Helam? And if we let the Yetzirah take control of us, Chalila, there are people who live in a geder where they say it's this Botei Baroi and Botei Gavoy, and the outside chamber is Oiz V'ched B'mkoime, and the Botei Gavoy, it's B'mistorim Tifke Nafshi. A person is broken and torn apart because the Yetzirah has control of him, over him. But if a person is not masakin himself, Rahman al-Islam, the tumah, connect itself to him, and as we spoke in previous weeks, L'netzach netzachim, and his neshama can enter Gan Eden with these pagomim, with these blemishes, with the tumah of the chitzonius tearing at the sanctity of his neshama. And that's why this kedusha is so central to avodas Hashem. It's not just a milsa de chesidus, it's not just an inyan of frumkeit. It's Yesod, it's the foundation of being a yid. And according to many Svarim Akdoshim, it's the most important tachlis that we hear on this world, is to fight the Yetzirah. And when one is lacking in the proper shmirah, it brings with it many, many different problems. Firstly, the Svarim teach us that a lack of shmirah, a lack of kedusha, in inyonim of kedusha HaYesod, makes a person lose all his hergish, all his sensation in avodas Hashem, the geschmack, the warmkeit in a davening, especially in a Shabbos. He doesn't feel it. He doesn't appreciate it. He can't appreciate a nishmas. He can't appreciate the tainig of a Shabbos Kodesh because he's attached himself to chitzonius, to the outer shell, to the klipa, and therefore he cannot feel, he can't be margish the kedusha b'davar pnimi. The Svarim HaKadoshim tell us that this is the source of atzvus, of depression, of despair, of yish. We know that when a person is dachan, he becomes a broken vessel. Because in the world of chitzonius, there's only fleeting pleasure. But true simcha is only liyishrei leiv simcha. Only in the world of teichen, only in reality, only in the world of Yesod can a person have joy. The tumah of Eretz Ha'amim brings a person that he can't understand the Torah. The Chesed LaAvram brings a person has two types of eyes. He has einayim ruchniim, he has spiritual sight, and einayim gashmiim. And they're each dependent one on the other. If a person uses his einayim gashmiim for things that he shouldn't be using it, so then there's a header, there's a lack, there's a weakness, there's an einayim ruchniim, and he sees the Torah, and the Torah, he can't connect to the Torah. The Ben Ish Chai is masber that not only that, the einayim, the kedusha of the eyes, is the einayim is the only sense that we have lo'olam haba. As you know, there's taste, there's smell, and there's sight. Ben Ish Chai explains. On this world, in olam hazeh, we can relate to taste. There's a world of achila v'shtia. In Gan Eden HaTachton, where the neshama goes first, there's reyach. There's an inyan of ruchnius, and a person can sense through reach. When a person gets to the Gan Eden HaElyon, there's no more tam, there's no more reach, there's only rio. There's only nehenim miziva shchina. That's the highest level that there is. That's why in a person's face, the mouth is the lowest, higher than that is the nose, and higher than that is the eyes, because that's the higher faculty that a person has. And if a person damages the chusha einayim, the person damages the chusha, and everything that we see is recorded like on a camera, like on a film. And the Chidor writes the B'shas Petirif, and a person, they show him, they unroll that film, and every single riyah that he saw in his lifetime will be showed before him. And we have to be mispalel man loy nevosh v'loy nikolim. We shouldn't be ashamed on that day when we have to face the Bezdin Shalmala. And if we lose the chusha riyah through riyah so asuros, with what are we going to be able to absorb and be nehena from the ziva shchina? So Lashon Sam Soif in Parshas Koirach, he writes, Yesh la'odam shnei minei einayim. A person has two types of eyes. Einei seichel shebo yasig kol musig, that he can understand depth. Ve'einei gashmius. V'horoitze liftoyach einei gashmius yistemu mimenu mayonei hachachma. According to how much a person opens the gashmius dika eyes, get closed the rochnius dika eyes. B'toyach elu yistemu elu. And if we want to be zoiche to the sechzena
We have to be oimid with a starkheit, with a gvura in these nisyonis, and be zeiche to ke'ayin ba'ayin nirsa Hashem. And that's why we find that tzaddikim were moise nefesh for kedusha seinaim. Chazal tell us the story of Matzio ben Chorosh, who had a time of nisayin. He went and he blinded himself. He shouldn't be nichshal in a rio asura. The Chavetz Chaim was once sitting in somebody's house at a meal, and it was a young girl was coming in, and she wasn't dressed so tznius. She kept coming in and coming out, and finally the Chavetz Chaim says, "What do you think? You think we're malachim sitting here?" Anan man nana abasre. Somebody once came to the Chazon Ish with a shaila. And as his shoulders, the separate beaches, and his wife wanted to go swimming. She had a little 2-year-old son. Whether it's okay to take him along, he doesn't understand anything. And the Chazon Ish said, if you want this child to sit and learn Torah b'hasmoda, you should know what he sees. If he's at the stage where he could remember, he's going to see riyas that will remain with him. And how will he ever have the eyes to be able to be miyageya in Torah? How careful do we have to be when we live in a world where the Satan wants to destroy us with Elekeim shel Eila Soine Zimahu? How careful we have to be in inyanim of tznius. And tznius doesn't just mean for women. Tznius applies to men also. There's the way a person acts, the way a person speaks, the way a person dresses. Even at a home, when he's behind. I once heard from Shmuel Kamenetsky, gesund und stark, he said, when he was growing up with his father, Rabbi Yankiv Zatzal, he never remembers ever seeing his father, Rabbi Yankiv, in an undershirt. He never saw it. There was an understanding that just because the door closes, and just because I'm in private, doesn't mean that doesn't mean that I suddenly become hefker. I still have dignity. I still have tznius. Wasn't long ago when there was anthrax being sent in the mail. We think it stopped. There's always poison coming in the mail. Rahman al-Itzlan, what can enter into the mailbox of a Yiddish house, we don't realize. We have to be so careful. We have young children. And I've heard this from Bochrim. I've heard this so many times, Rabbi Isai, talking about real things. There are catalogs that come. And people are innocent, don't even think, just leave it around. It gets in the hands of somebody who's an impressionable, doesn't understand. And he becomes exposed to the worst of the tumah of Ummah Sa'olam. We don't even think, we don't realize that's a very convenient way to shop. Why did the Goyim put all this tumah into their catalogs? Because they want people to open it. That's why they do it. If a person isn't careful, Rahman al-San, Yidei Noshim Rahmani is Bishlu Yaldein. We're innocently shopping, and we leave things around the house, and we let them into the house. They shouldn't be brought into the house, B'chlal. How careful do we have to be with this keli that's called the computer, which one could attach to an internet, which Rahman al-Islam could expose a person to the worst that human imagination has to offer. How careful do we have to be if one needs it for business, to keep it in the business, but keep it away from our children and keep it away from ourselves. There was an Asifas HaRabbanim in New York a year ago. The Rabbanim got together to discuss what to do about this terrible problem. There's an internet that, as Pashat has it's hefker, mamish hefker avelt. There's no stopping it. What they should do. And at this meeting was one of the district attorney of New York, a very important Goyish politician. And he said to the Asif of the Rabbanim, he said, I'm quoting you his Lashon. He said, the internet has destroyed us. Our society is rotting at the core. We are not going to come out of this. We've lost our youth. Maybe you Orthodox Jews, if you'll build a good gate around yourselves, you hear a Lashon? If you'll build a good gate around yourselves, you'll be able to be saved from this onslaught on morality. But we become so used to things, and things that should nauseate us and disgust us really have an effect on us anymore. Because that is the nature of this tumah. The Orach Chaim HaKodesh, in Parshas Achrei Mos, when he talks about the mitzvah of Prisha Me'arayas, he says every mitzvah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Klal Yisrael, we have the natural ability to be Mekayim the mitzvah. With the exception, Zulas mitzvahs Prishas Ho'arayas. This mitzvah is a davar shenafshoy shel adam mechamdeson v'oinsesoy aleim la'asoyson. There's a strong desire, a natural teva in a person to be nimshach after this chet. And the only way one could withstand these nisyonis is only with giddorim, where the person is goyder himself. Merchak of Riyah and Machshava. When a person does that, he can become a Kodesh. He can be Mekayim these mitzvahs. And then he can reach extraordinary levels of Kedusha. Because in Pnimius there's no Gvul. In Chitzonius is finite, but Pnimius is infinite. And when a person is Mekadesh himself, and even though you do have the Svarim bring a Lashon and Zohar HaKadosh where it's Mavur that on some Averis in this Inyan it says a Lashon doesn't help Tshuva. But the Svarim HaKadoshim Amarech Ma'oid that it's not Kifi Pshuta and Avada Tshuva Iloh helps, and especially Tshuva of Limad HaTorah B'Yigiyah. There's nothing that can cleanse a person's neshama, that haravanya, struggling and toiling in understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah, because be'etam the svara should be, if a window in a building gets broken, you just replace it. But if a foundation gets destroyed, nothing you can do. You can't throw down the whole building and dig it up again. So how do you do tshuva? But Torah has a koyach to be mitar and to be mezachach and to be mesaken the foundation, to rebuild the yesod of a person ki'ilu was never nivgam in the first place. And this is brought countless times the Sefirah Shiurim. And a person can reach such a level, as the Lashonis, just quote some of the Lashonis the Sefirah bring from Zohar HaKadosh, Ki'ilu kayim oiraisa kadisha kula. A person who's a shomer, who's upgehitten in the Kedusha of Yosef HaTzadik, is as if he was Mekayim all of Torah. And Shchinte lo yisparish mino, the Shchina doesn't want to leave, doesn't separate itself from such a person. Megin, the Lashon of the Zohar HaKadosh, he protects kol ha'olam b'schusoy, v'zoiche l'tanig ba'avodosa yizbarach. Another Lashon, mizdazin minei iloin v'tatan. Somebody who's zoiche to Kedusha is zoiche that iloin elyoine v'tachtoinim tremble from him. But there's a very important yesod, Reb Tzadok and other Svarim HaKadoshim bring. A person should not let himself be swayed by the Yetzer Hara. There's a very powerful Yetzer Hara and a Satan Befrat Bizmaneinu which tells a person it's too late. Doesn't make a difference anymore. You already nivgam, you already were nichshal, you already saw, you already thought, you already did whatever it is, machshava dibur u'maisa, and what difference does it make? What are you going to fix? What are you going to be misakin? That is the language of the Satan himself. That is the worst thing a person could say to himself. Punkt verkehrt mevur bekame mekoimes. Every single milchama, every time, every new battle, every time a person overcomes his Yetzer in this struggle, he's boikei arekim, and he's nichnas legeder tzaddik, and he can be zoiche to the title of tzaddik yesod olam. And even if he falls other times, but each time that he's zoiche to be misgaber as a new schus, at that moment he has a koyach hatfila. He can ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for anything he wants. And it says in the Svarim, a person has to realize we have no idea. Nobody knows how great his neshama is. Nobody knows if he says we can Dariya Kadosh says a person can be an Adam Pashut, and he can have a neshama that's so high and so exalted that it encompasses many of the neshamas in his door. And one small netiyah l'toiv, one small hisgabris can have such an effect on all the ilamas and on the world, on himself, and could bring so much kedusha. The Balatanya in Perek Chav Zayin writes Dvarim Nifloim. He says sometimes a person looks at tzaddik and says that tzaddik is so great, he never has such nisyonis, he never has a machshava that's improper. And here, why am I lot? Why am I nimshach after things that seem so beneath me? Why is it a person is worried? And Zog the Heilige Balatanya, there are two types of avodah. There is such a thing as a tzaddik who is especially ois geidel to neshama and he doesn't have these nisyonis, but there's another type of tzaddik who also sings a shir to the Rebbeinu Shalom. There is a person who's sent on this world just to be a loichem, just to do battle. And it's possible that he'll never overcome his Yetzer Hara. He'll never get over it. He'll always be in a battle, always be in a milchama. And yet each time he fights, b'chol d'chiyah u'd'chiyah, shematcheyu mimachshavto yiskafye sitra acher l'sato. He pulls down the sitra acher, he overcomes it. And we cannot imagine the goydel nachas ruach lefonov yisborach. U'lechein, he writes, al yipol leiv odom oilov. He shouldn't be despair by himself. V'lo yera levovoi gam im yekein kol yomov b'milchama zu, because it could be lekach nivre v'zois avoidosoi. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants the avoid of those who are doing battle. The Mordek Aricha said, dvarim nifloim, not to take lightly the effects of fighting the Yetzer Hara. One time, Sheva Yipol Tzadik v'kom, with one aliyah, with one mitzvah on the Yetzer Hara, a person could be masakin so many nefilas, he could turn them all into mitzvahs. Moira de Galosh and Rab Tzadik and Tzidkas HaTzadik, it's an ois ayin vov. Be'ez kishloin ha'adam, a person has a dorchfal, a person has a nefila. Yeda sheba'ois so'ez, that moment, hu hachona lo'ois dova l'toiv. It's prepared for him a tremendous level of kedusha. V'im yiske ba'ois sho yuchalalois lemadrege gedoyle ma'oid kefi goydel hachet sha'yetzer meisisoy kach hu goydel ha'toive she'yuchal likloit oz. According to how great and powerful the tumah is, that's how much kedusha he could bring in himself from one time being misgaber. There's a letter from the Heilige Steipler, he writes, the Sforim are so marich in the pagam and how much a person can fall, but it's not broad enough how great a person could become. I've said over once before the unbelievable words of the Shem Shmuel. The Shem Shmuel quotes a Lashon HaZoyer. A person could b'sho chod u'verige chod in 1 second, in 1 hour, could reach a higher madrega than a tzaddik gomer. So how could that be? How could it be a person could in 1 second reach the level of a tzaddik gomer? He says there are 2 ways of avodas Hashem. There's the long way, where a person goes year after year and he has to fight and learn and struggle and do everything till he gets close to the Rebbeinu Shalom. But then there's something else. A person could live in a time when there's so much tumah, and there's so much zuhama, there's so much shmutz. And if a person living in such a tkufa and in such a sviva makes a decision, he turns himself away from that. He says, I have no chelik to that. That is not connected to me. At that moment, enters into his neshama a kedusha that's equal to all that tumah. Think of how many millions of hours of thought and talent and hashchasa went into creating this entire world of tumah. Imagine having that b'kedusha. B'shoch chod u'v'riga chod. It's a world of Nisayim, but it's a world of unbelievable opportunity. That's why this is the generation that could bring Mashiach. Because there's never been a generation with such nisyonis. Our Zaydis and Bobbas didn't confront in a lifetime what we can see in one day's mail. Or with one flick of a button on a computer. And if in such a generation a person is misgaber, and he's mekadesh himself, and he's shoymer himself, Avad, such a generation could bring Mashiach. And the Sfarim HaKadoshim bring many eitzes, many tikkunim that a person can do to be matar himself, to mazachich himself, to cleanse his Yesod, the chelik of him that's nelam. As we said before, a person has a shas nesoyin, it's a zman of tefillah. The Bnei Yisachar writes, a person finds himself in a soyin, it's a Indian to be menader something then for tzedakah. And that will weaken the power of the Yesod. The Chidor writes, 3 Yesodes the Ketikunim. The Rosh Tevis is Pesha, Pizur, Shabbos, and Anivus. Tzedakah is a tremendous tikkun, especially tzedakah Erev Shabbos, B'yom HaShishi. Shmira Shabbos, not just Shmira Shabbos, but Hislavos and Shabbos, covered in Shabbos, being ma'anig the Shabbos, giving koyach, preparing for the Shabbos, being mechaber the Shabbos. Anivus, not standing on one's covered, being mevater, humbling himself, walking humbly in the presence of others, in the presence of Hashem. Tefillah, especially be mechaven by the tefillah of Tekabah Shoifa Godel L'Cheiruseinu, by the tefillah of Berich Shemei, doing a mitzvah with his lavas, sweating by a mitzvah. The Mishabura brings sweating by Asiyas Hamatzes as a tikkun for this pagam. And be'ikr, the ikr tikkun that's brought in the Svarim HaKadoshim is Yigiyas HaTorah, learning Torah, struggling to understand the Dvar Hashem, filling our minds with Chochmas Hashem. And when this Chochmah, when this Torah, the Rambam writes already, the Machshavas of these inyanim are not nitfas only in a leiv that's ponim in a Chochmah. When a person's mind is occupied with Torah's Hashem, he's zoichet to Kedusha, he's zoichet to Tahara. And in these days of B'chor Choisman, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a special hashpah of Chesed, and even though there's such a hisgabrus of the Klippa, Kedayav Shetadaman, we mentioned that the Klippa, the Tzad Klippa of Chesed is the Klippa of Yishmael. We mentioned the previous Shiurim. It's the Tzad Pseilos of Avraham Avinu. We see a Moedik hisgabrus and the power of Yishmael up to a point where it sometimes seems like we can't do anything about it. Some people are miyayish when it comes to this inyan. Nothing. What can we do? What can we do to save our youth? What can we do to protect them? It's just impossible. Wherever you go, there's tumah. It's hopeless. And that's the power of Yishmael. We look at it, we say, it's hopeless. You can't walk out on the street. Who knows where they are? Yet we're living in a tkufa. We're seeing slowly the breaking of the klippa of Yishmael. A hashpola, a little bit being put down, is a man of siyata d'shmaya, where we can also be mashpil, the koiches of klippa, the koiches of tumah that are so powerful in the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should answer our tefillas, because when we want, when there's a rotzen, and the little bit that we do, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is moisif, b'vchinas l'keil goymer oloi. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants to see our rotzen, when we spal katsheinu b'mitzvaysecho, v'sein chelkeinu b'soyrasecho, sabeinu mituvecha, v'samach nafsheinu b'shuasecho, v'taher libeinu la'ovdecha be'emes. If we mispal richtig to the Rebbeinu Shalom could be metaros, the Rebbeinu Shalom could cleanse us, and the Rebbeinu Shalom could give us the madrega of Kedusha. We could be a merkov of Kedusha, mamleches koyin and v'goy kodosh, be makabel the Torah with Kedusha of Klal Yisrael, be zoichet taket, be mekayim the mitzvahs of Kedoshim to you. In the days of Sfir l'kadshenu, l'tareinu b'dushos chel yoyna, amen, celeb is met zoichet and to be as goyel tzedek, meher meinu, amen.